without further ado, I've got David here, and I'm eagerly sitting on the edge of my seat to see this clinic. Something that really interests me. So straight over to you, David, so I can learn all I can.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. I'm a retired church architect and conservation architect. I love scratch building structures, so thank you for joining me today for this NMRAx virtual convention clinic on scratch building Western Maryland railway structures and more. My summers as a boy in America were spent watching Western Maryland trains roll by the Highfield Train Order Office just over the Mason-Dixon line in Maryland, a short bike ride from our home at Monterey Circle in Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania. Between trains, I did my first measured drawings of a building, the Highfield Train Order Office. This was 1961. Building a model of the Highfield Train Order Office seemed just the right place to start in modeling the Western Maryland Railway, some 3,000 miles and 22 years away from what I had known and loved as a boy. I was confirmed at the Episcopal Church of the Transfiguration in Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, just down the track from Highfield by the Blue Ridge storage tracks. I'm really fond of this mountain place and see the Church of the Transfiguration as one of my spiritual homes, another very special modeling project. For me, scratch building is fun. You can model any prototype structure you want. By scratch building, you'll never have to wait for that special kit to be produced. There's no problem about kits being too expensive or no longer being available. You can create just what you want, when you want, and make it fit your ideas, your layout, and your budget. Scratch building structures can help make even the most complex structure affordable by enabling you to build it bit by bit as your budget allows, just like in the real world. And what do you need to start? Well, the first thing is to have an idea of what you'd like to model. In my case, it was simple. I wanted to model the area around where I'd grown up on the Western Maryland Railway on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. I had some photos I'd taken as well as measured drawings I'd done of two Western Maryland Railway buildings, the Highfield Maryland Train Order Office and the Waynesboro, Pennsylvania Freight Station. I was keen to start my first two scratch-built buildings. The first lesson I learned is that I didn't have all the information I would have really liked before starting to build them. But that's just the kind of thing I find out in each project I tackle. This naturally leads to the second lesson, the good enough factor. I like the idea of the good enough factor. After all, you can always come back and rebuild bits or all of models. Which brings to mind the third lesson. I was so excited to be at Highfield and to hang out just where I did 22 years before that I didn't take the opportunity to measure and photograph all that I could have. Nowadays, I make a checklist of what I want to record well in advance and keep it for reference. If you don't have a specific prototype or location in mind, where do you start? Railroad historical societies publish a lot of really good information, and of course the internet and Facebook provide astonishing resources of historic photographs, maps, aerial photographs, and almost unlimited information. My favorite source of ideas is working from old photographs and maps. That feeling that you just have to build it when you see the photograph of it for the first time. In the bottom left-hand corner, the crazy Swiss chalet look of Edgemont Station made it an absolute must and called out, "Model me." And of course, that is the fourth lesson. You really need to want to model a particular building or structure to make building a model of it really enjoyable. In my case, one of the things I decided early on is to check to see that the buildings I choose to model look American and can't be mistaken for anything other than American. Scratch building was the answer. I get a real buzz from tracking down old photographs and maps to further my model building. A good example is the Waynesboro, Pennsylvania Western Maryland Railway Station and Railway Express Agency Depot. In this case, I only had this one photo that I'd taken in January 1963, aged 14. It shows the south elevation of the depot, and just to the right of it, in the mid-distance, what I then knew as a gas station. It took me about 8 years to find the remaining series of photos, some dating back to the early 1900s. These enabled me to understand what the depot had originally looked like and how it had changed over the years. In addition, I found out that the gas station had earlier been the depot of the Cumberland Valley Railroad, later the Pennsylvania Railroad. Here's a fabulous image of World War I soldiers leaving Waynesboro in 1917. with a rare glimpse of the back of the depot. We've already seen the January 1963 photo I'd taken showing the south elevation of the depot, and then in the mid-distance what I then knew as a gas station and service garage. This earlier color photo, and a detail of it, clearly show the gas station with its depot doors and central canted bay and depot clock. And this archive photo shows the Cumberland Valley Railroad depot with its platform canopies intact. There are three series of maps and charts that I found extremely helpful. This June 1947 Sanborn insurance map is the closest map to the 1960s era that I'm modeling, so it's a great starting point. The insurance maps of the Sanborn Map Company at a scale of 50 feet to 1 inch are invaluable. The number of stories of each building and section of building is shown, as are canopies and overhanging roofs. This is very helpful when modeling depots, as one can see the finished model of the Cumberland Valley Railroad depot. The L-shaped canopy was its signature statement. The original Sanborn maps are color tinted to denote the different building materials that were used: yellow for timber, pink for brick, and blue for stone. But in these black and white images, I've tinted Western Maryland Railway property and right-of-way deep red and Cumberland Valley Railroad's yellow for ease of reference and comparison. For Waynesboro, there are a series of insurance maps spanning 1886, 1891, 96, and 1902, and January 1910, and finally June 1947. So here we are, we've got the images of 1896 and 1902. So you can therefore trace in detail the growth and decline of Waynesboro's two railroads, the Western Maryland and the Mont Alto, later the Cumberland Valley, and later still the Pennsylvania, building by building and track by track. You can even discover the appearance and disappearance of a turntable. Before being introduced to the Sanborn insurance maps, I was happy to use U.S. Geological Survey maps. The U.S. Geological maps do, of course, have all the details of contours and other natural features, as well as buildings and block form, but at a much smaller scale. The Sanborn insurance maps have far more details of buildings. They even have details of the internal layouts of the ground floor of commercial buildings, including the soda fountain in my Uncle Funky's drugstore in Center Square, Waynesboro. The third source I found was the Western Maryland Railway Company's track charts. This one for Edgemont shows the right-of-way in 5 parallel lines, denoting ballast in 1, rail, the weight of the rail, with the dates of laying and relaying, the alignment of the track in relation to grade crossings, signals, railroad structures, bridges and streets, culverts, watercourses connecting private company railroad tracks, and the date of track removals, and the grade line, including all the bridge numbers. This early photograph of homecoming celebrations in Waynesboro had a very significant impact on my understanding of the construction of the depot. It emphasized its board and batten timber walls, its modular-like construction of comparatively wide boards set on a stone plinth. This was a key photograph. Finding so many photos had been the first step. Finding the photograph of the homecoming celebrations was wonderful. I really wanted to celebrate it, so I created a large colored screen print from it to hang on the wall. The next thing I needed to do was to prepare scale drawings. My first attempt at this was based on the width of doors and windows being either 2 foot 3 inches or 2 foot 6 inches, but I was having trouble getting the overall proportions to look right. Luckily, I happened to go to a lecture on early American timber building techniques. This introduced me to the measurement of 5.5 yards. From the photos, I prepared scale drawings using a scale grid based on dividing and subdividing one measurement in half. 5.5 yards, again and again. Why 5.5 yards? A rod, pole, or perch is a unit of linear measurement equal to 5.5 yards or 16.5 feet. The three terms appear to be interchangeable and are the standard unit of measurement in traditional timber buildings in both Britain and America. By dividing and subdividing this measurement in half again and again to cut timber, you avoid waste. By drawing these divisions and subdivisions, you get a modular grid which can help you work out the dimensions of buildings from carefully looking at old photographs. How do you start? Draw your own scale grid in your scale of choice. Draw it 4 rods by 2 rods. That's 66 feet by 33 feet. Subdivide the top right-hand corner square into half, which would equal a scale 8 feet 3 inches. Then into a quarter, equaling 4 feet 1.5 inches, and then 1/8, which would equal 2 feet and 3/4 of an inch. Extend the lines as a tartan grid to a scale 66 feet by 33 feet. Now you can overlay tracing paper onto your tartan grid and develop a plan in sections. If you take the standard width of doors to be 2 feet 3 inches or 2 feet 6 inches, and windows is the same, you can start to develop the plan. Of course, there will be exceptions to this, hence the term standard. But start by thinking about standard widths. Don't be afraid to draw it out and to redraw it again and again until it looks right. Using the same discipline, you can build up the elevations. You may find it easier to work up an elevation first and then use the elevation to help generate the plan. You can see in this image the yellow, if we just go back quickly, that yellow there and the orange. And here are the orange and yellow divisions with the windows marked out. I used this technique to prepare the drawings of the Waynesboro Railway Express Agency depot and passenger station. This led to the overall external dimension of the depot model as built being a scale 22 feet by 45 feet. Some years later, I discovered a spectacular source for my Western Maryland Railway buildings, the insurance schedules from the foreman of road carpenters to the division engineer, dated July 30th, 1913. These, coupled with the August 1918 photographic index of the railroad's buildings, confirmed the good enough factor in the dimensions of the depot as modeled. Passenger station at Waynesboro, 20 feet by 44 feet. Now my model was 22 feet by 45 feet. I could add in mitigation that my dimensions are the external overall dimensions as modeled. Were the dimensions recorded for insurance purposes internal ones? Whichever way we look at it now, the dimensions of the finished model satisfy my desired good enough factor. Scale color is critical. The depot, as originally painted, as you see on the left, was simply just too dark. So dark one couldn't see the details. Not only was the depot itself too dark, but so was all the surrounding scenery. A radical change was needed, preceded by careful color experiments. Actually, they were not only too dark, they were also too weathered. I invited my good friend and fellow NMRA British Region member Chris Hopper to come over and give an unfettered critique of my small layout and its buildings. The simple but robust response was that everything was too dark. That was the track, the ballast, the trees, the roads, the buildings, and the weathering. What followed was a major campaign on my part of gently retrieving the situation by preparing a new approach based on scale color. Several experiments on different backs of structures over time led to a careful program of revitalizing the layout, and, while it's not yet complete, it is already looking significantly better. Study the photographs of model railroads that you enjoy, and especially study their color palettes and weathering. The other really important thing about painting structures is to have a narrow palette or range of colors. Look at layouts and modules by Brian Moore, Fred Lagno, Tom Johnson, Mike Confalone, Lance Meinheim, and Polly Soberg in the American Model Railroad Press and on Facebook, and you'll see exactly what I mean. The colors hang together so well. There is no place for discordant colors. A further aspect of weathering and careful detailing is that it ties all the buildings together visually. This is really important. Just as having a strong railroad presence by a consistent approach to a railroad company's paint schemes for all railroad company owned property. The second project was going to be really different. A big 100 feet long brick freight shed. I had read of an English technique to model brickwork. Just take some card, Draw parallel lines 10 millimeters apart, apply a small amount of white wood glue, and gently place individual bricks in whatever brick bond you want, 3 high per each 10 millimeter gap, using old-fashioned computer card punchings, or CHAD as it is evidently known. The Worcester, England Scenery Company, Green Scene, sell CHAD. This is a lovely therapeutic technique that allows great flexibility in creating brick structures. There was one problem. The model as I first built it was too short. The implied symmetry of the roof structure was significantly missing in part. When I measured this with my 6-foot folding rod decades before at age 14, I had, in my memory, incorrectly presumed that I had started from the north end of the structure with a series of 6-foot measurements, counting them as I went along. But after much thought, I realized that I had not started from the north end, but from the south end. So by starting the 6-foot lengths from the correct end, measuring on my model, the symmetry of the roof structure was finally achieved, and I could now sleep easily. Looking at this image, just to the left of the turn of the wall between the first 2 roof trusses, you can see that the whole end of the structure was sawn off and stretched by a further 6 scale feet, and the brickwork patched. Disaster averted. There are 4 drawbacks that come to mind. First, don't sneeze or cough, or your bricks will go everywhere. Second, this is not for the faint-hearted. This is a technique that takes time. My first tiny bit of wall, under 2 inches square, but with 2 window openings cut into it, took me about 2 hours. Third, getting the CHAD the right way up. My stock of CHAD is printed on the back, and it's a real drag getting it the right way round. Fourth, it's bigger than it should be, and therefore not strictly in scale. Having said all that, choose the card for the color of the card for the wall carefully. The color of the card becomes the color of the mortar. When the CHAD is dried thoroughly, simply wipe wood stain over it and stand back and be amazed. I used Colron Peruvian mahogany wood stain, which gives a lovely brick color for deep red bricks. The roof is card overlaid with overlapping tiny pieces of tissue paper to represent tar paper. The open door here is the one my darling dad backed my grandfather's chain drive truck up to collect kaffir corn imported from Africa to add to the chicken feed at the family's Hopewell roller mill just outside Waynesboro. The overhead iron beam was installed after December 1931 as part of a trolley hoist crane. No wonder my dear dad couldn't remember it when I quizzed him about what he might have used it for. He was sent to England in January 1930, nearly 2 years earlier. I encourage anyone and everyone to get involved in the Achievement Program. This very simple coal trestle met the requirements for the Master Builder's Structure Certificate for the building of a trestle or bridge structure. After 22 years in England, I made my first trip back to Pennsylvania for the sole purpose of measuring and recording everything that still existed. Fortunately, the coal trestle was more or less intact. Here is the October 1985 site sketch at the top left of its typical trestle bent with the key dimensions of its timbers, along with my lower left, my HO scale drawing. Each bent was made of pre-stained timber, glued together with wood glue and detailed with tiny nut, bolt, and washer castings. I'd always wondered what NBW castings were. Each completed bent was in turn glued onto a double thickness of cardstock representing the concrete plinth of its trestle bent. My favorite source of ideas is working from old photographs and maps. That feeling that you just have to build it when you see the photograph for the first time. The all-American 19th century stick and shingle style of the Crazy Swiss Chalet look of Edgemont Station made it an absolute must and called out, "Model me." The right-hand photograph shows on its left a train coming up the mountain on the Waynesboro branch line, and to the right of the station, the main line from Baltimore, heading west towards Penmar Park and Hagerstown, Maryland. I did a lino cut as a fun image to explore the all-American 19th century stick and shingle style impact of the Edgemont Station building, and how the dramatic alternating diagonal border gives such vitality to the look of the structure. The prominent chimney stack called for it to emit smoke, certainly in model form. A smooth smoke generator is installed in the model, and it works. I use the subdivisions of my HO scale rod pull and perch grid technique to prepare these elevation drawings of the Edgemont station to help me scratch build the model of the station. Layers of embossed brick sheet build up the heavy profile of the prominent chimney stack. The windows and doors are all scratch built. The glazing bars are 0.20 inch square Slater plastic strip, styrene strip. Thin strips of masking tape build up the junctions of the model's rainwater goods along copper wire. And I found that discarded sparkler sticks are very, very good for that, just the right sort of size. The foundation stonework is weathered Wills cast sheet. Well, this is the former Western Mound Railway Station at Blue Ridge Summit that was built in 1891 to replace an earlier smaller station dating from 1872 in order to better serve a flourishing growing summer resort community, providing a passenger service from 1872 to 1957. In 1958, the Western Maryland Railway presented the deed to the station and 1½ acres of land to the Board of Directors of the library with the following statement. In the tradition of the good neighbor, the Western Maryland family deeds to all the families of Blue Ridge Summit this familiar community meeting place to be used as a free public library, thus continuing in a cultural sense the close relationship between the railroad and the people. Still a free public library, this much-loved station building with its delightful tower continues to serve the mountain community. And indeed, this is very, very close to where I lived as a child at Monterey. Under John Mifflin's Hood's presidency of the Western Maryland from 1874 to 1902, 270 miles of new track were laid. The famous resort of Penmar Park was developed by the Western Maryland. Gross earnings rocketed from just over $218,000 to just over $2,120,000. And excursion passengers had grown in numbers from 72,510 in 1875 to 558,248 in 1898, when the Blue Ridge Summit Resort area was firmly established. The railroad realized the potential and desirability of a residential summer colony at Blue Ridge Summit in Monterey. In 1884, John Mifflin Hood, president of the Western Maryland Railway, told the stockholders, "A movement is also in progress, having its object the establishment of summer residences at Blue Ridge Summit and Monterey in the near vicinity of the Blue Mountain House and with Penmar. And judging from the class of people now turning their attention that way, there can be little doubt in a few years thousands of our city people will have provided summer houses in these near elevations where the most favorable conditions for good health, pleasure, and convenience to business are combined." The following year, 1885, the Monterey Land Company, a group of prominent Baltimore citizens, bought the Monterey Springs Farm and created out of it a planned summer community, Monterey. This is, in fact, where I lived in the early 1960s. The Monterey Historic District was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1976 and covers approximately 250 acres in the Blue Ridge Summit area of Franklin County, Pennsylvania. Monterey is a fine example of a 19th century summer resort community and still retains the gracious ambience of the Victorian era. The majority of the properties and lanes were laid out around 1890, and houses still stand in the picturesque or English informal setting. Although the architecture reflects a nostalgic appeal for the old vernacular colonial architecture, the style should be called transitional, since symmetry and colonial forms are combined with many picturesque qualities and details. During the 1880s, many people were reacting to life in the cities, and Monterey reflects a desire to create an ideal seasonal colony, far from factories and commerce. As a summer resort, Monterey thrived from about 1885 through World War II, as did the larger Blue Ridge Summit area. Hotels were full, parks were attractive, the scenery impressive, the climate healthy. Even as late as 1940, about a dozen foreign embassies maintained summer legations in Blue Ridge, many at Monterey, occasioning, occasioning it to be often called the summer capital of the United States. But by then the automobile had emerged and the railroad excursion business declined. I've used N-scale Redutex sheet on the cylindrical tower on this emerging HO scale model of the Western Maryland Railway's Blue Ridge Summit passenger station, which is just the right size for its diminutive fish scale tile hanging. Redutex sheets are a comparatively recent development. They are self-adhesive, flexible, and an easy-to-cut sheet material and beautifully molded in gently colored ranges of brick, tile, stone, wood, and paving. This has enabled me to clad a cylindrical tower in fish-scale tile hanging, which looks terrific. The new machine-turned stainless steel and aluminium finial has been most kindly made for me by fellow NMRA British Region modeler and friend Peter Everett. It literally completes the station, as the height of the finial gives an implied repose to the composition of the station's trackside elevation. Imagine the internal apex of a triangle sitting on the tip of the finial, and the triangle itself sitting on the station roof. So just imagine this. There's a triangle from there going like this. We'll see in the next image my previous finial. This finial makes all the difference to the model. It's just superb. Brantline cast porch columns are yet to be added around the outer edge of the station's 10 feet wide verandas at 10 feet intervals, and so visually reinforce the station's grid pattern. Whatever materials you choose, be prepared for the inevitable warping. Every material I've tried over the years, card, wood, or styrene, have all been prone to warping. By carefully designing return walls as bracing, you can usually overcome most problems of this sort. However, I've had a few disaster cases where a major structural intervention has been necessary in order to save both the model and the modeler from being basket cases. A good example is this Blue Ridge Summit Depot, which I lovingly started and then abandoned for about 8 years because the whole floor structure had badly warped. I was finally able to rescue it after thinking of building a major downstand beams and using long machine screws complete with washers and nuts to pull the diagonal warping out. Machine screws also double up as electrical conductors for the wiring to the interior lights. Perhaps this is the place to add that having lovingly built your model building, don't forget to bury it. When did you last see a real building sitting on top of the ground? More than likely, most buildings you've seen come out of the ground because in real life they have foundations. So build your building with foundations that can be sunk into a hole in the scenery and have the scenery go up to the building rather than having the building perched precariously on the top of the scenery. Of course, it's also a good way of securing models from accidentally being brushed off onto the floor, a familiar and not unknown hazard on my own layout. I'm very fortunate to have a good collection of photographs of the station that I took all those years ago, as well as a wonderful range of archive photos. But because of the perspective on the majority of the photographs that included the view of the tower, I really struggled to try to understand just where the tower was located. After many attempts at drawing the trackside elevation of the station, I realized that the station and its platform had been planned on a 10-foot square grid of 9 bays by 4 bays. The station itself was designed on a 10-foot square grid of 7 bays by 2 bays, and that the tower is located in the central bay of the 7-bay grid of the station building itself. And now for true confessions. As I was reviewing all this earlier this morning and thinking about the grid, I thought, well, 10 feet doesn't go with the grid that I was talking about. The nearest point on that grid was 8 feet and 3 inches, not 10 feet. So why isn't it on a grid of 8 feet 3 inches or something? So I've looked up the dimensions that are given in the insurance schedule, and actually the grid should not be 10 feet, but 9 feet. I think I have to say here, well, this is going to be the good enough thing. I'm not going to be rebuilding this building. I've already rebuilt it once because studying the photographs, I got so engrossed between vertical boarding and horizontal boarding that I did all the plinth as horizontal boarding and all the main structure as vertical boarding. And when I just got round to the corner, having gone around 3 slides just to start the fourth and final slide, I looked at my archive photos and thought, oh, it's the other way around. And I thought, I can't live with that. So I completely rebuilt it already once, so that's sufficient. I finally realized that the major problem that had been holding me back from being able to build the scratch-built buildings that I wanted to build was the problem of finding suitable windows and doors for the different ranges of existing castings, such as Grant Line or Alexander scale models. While these are excellent castings, and I've used them, they don't allow the same degree of flexibility that scratch building your own windows does if you want to capture the spirit of a particular building. Windows in buildings are like eyes in people. They're an essential part of the building's face, so it's worth taking the trouble to get them right and to get the detailing and framing around them right, too. Light scudding sideways across the face of the building will pick out these details, and if they're not there, the building will literally look flat in both senses of the word. Well-detailed windows will bring a building to life. The thought of scratch building my own windows was intimidating, but it has turned out to be the most liberating factor enabled me to tackle any scratch building project I want. I no longer had to try to match available castings with the prototype I'm trying to model. I used 0.20 by 0.20 inch Slater's microscript to form glazing bars, sash stalls, and meeting rails. The good enough factor obviously came into play here. But now, new technologies have opened up endless possibilities. Laser cutting and 3D printing are two that come to mind immediately. Drawings of doors and windows in AutoCAD or Adobe Illustrator can be emailed to specialist modelers who willingly create lovely scale doors and windows, posted back to your home and ready to insert into your latest project. And they do look lovely. The artwork for the laser cut doors and windows for my model of Western Maryland Railway's Blue Ridge Summit passenger station was done by my son, Sam McLaughlin, and emailed to York Model Making, who posted the resulting wonderful doors and windows to me. Following the arrival of the Western Maryland Railway to Blue Ridge Summit in 1872 and the subsequent development of the area as a mountain resort, the first Protestant Episcopal service was held in a summit cottage on the 1st of August, 1891. Mrs. Fanny B. Chipchase, wife of W. Edwin Chipchase of Baltimore Blue Ridge Summit, gave her summit cottage for a religious service, the first of the embryo Church of the Transfiguration. 94 people attended, and the Reverend W. A. Cole, rector of St. Luke's, Baltimore, was in charge. A week later, the Reverend Cole returned to give another service, this time on an open pavilion. Afterwards, subscriptions to erect a church building were asked, and several $100s subscribed. On September 5th, General Richard Page, Mr. Llewellyn Miller, and Mr. Chipchase were appointed to raise funds for the building. From the time the contract was given for the erection of the church in the winter of 1892 to the present, Blue Ridge Summit seemed blessed with persons eager to help it in every way. Thomas Buckler Gackquire of Baltimore was the architect. The church was completed by July 1st, but it wasn't until July 17th that the first service within its walls was held. Although built to seat 200 persons, the supply of worshippers exceeded demand, and it was necessary to purchase 7 or 8 dozen camp stools. Bishop Rollison consecrated the church on September 24, 1892. Mr. W. Edwin Chipchase, who alone had raised more than half the cost of the building and furnishings, read the request to consecrate. The congregation continued to increase, and the church was enlarged. On October 2, 1897, the Right Reverend Leighton Coleman, Bishop of Delaware, laid the cornerstone for the tower and transept enlargement. And there is the stone. Here it is, right there. In 1897, the tower and transepts were added, and a new pipe organ installed. The enlarged church seated 600. The church was again enlarged in 1907. An interesting sidelight on the good fortunes of the church was the issuance of passes by General J. M. Hood, president of the Western Maryland Railway, to the architect, Mr. Thomas Buckler Gackquire, and to Mr. Miller and Mr. Chipchase, when it was necessary for them to inspect the progress of the building. In addition, General Hood, as president of the Western Maryland Railway, refunded the freight charges on all the materials which the builders had paid. This was in line with the company's earlier policy of 1886, inducements to new settlers. Of course, it was in the interest of the Western Maryland to support the building of the new church. Not only was it highly visible from the original, 1872, and indeed later, 1891, Blue Ridge Summit Station, as well as from the track, the building served to show that the mountain resort community was well established, which would encourage others to invest in summer cottages, boarding houses, and hotels. And here's another early photo, top left, of the church. And to the top right, my first model of the Church of the Transfiguration was based on detailed measurements and photographs I had taken in October 1985 on my first trip back to America from when I had moved to England in 1963. It was a very emotional journey, and especially so as by this time the old summer church was no longer used as a church, but was being used as a contractor's compound. Sad as it was to see at that time, it was at least more or less intact. Over subsequent visits, I was very saddened to see its rapid decay to the inevitable time when there was nothing left of this sacred place. The making of the model had become a preservation by record exercise. The former parish rooms had by this time been well established as the Church of the Transfiguration. And while we've got this particular image up, you'll see below a couple of snaps of a drawing I've done of a developing Fremo module to show how a model of the church could fit on the edge of the Fremo board. So just keep that in mind. In more recent years, I've enjoyed developing Fremo modules. I've enjoyed developing Fremo modules. I decided that it would be wonderful to include a model of the Church of the Transfiguration, where I'd been confirmed back in 1961 on my new evolving Fremo modules. But my first model was simply far too big to include on the edge of the proposed module. I have had this problem before. I've readily solved it by taking a completed model and running it through my neighbor's bandsaw. The result is the front and back of a building immediately modeled, needing only minimum making good. But I just could not bring myself to subject this model of the Church of the Transfiguration, where I've been confirmed to such an inglorious and painful end. So I decided to make a new wedge-shaped model of the church, going from full width at the liturgical west end of the church, which would allow me to model its porch along the nave, transept, and chancel, to a very narrow width at its liturgical east end. This would give the opportunity to model the glorious central tower of the church, with its iconic pyramid roof and its liturgical north transept. The artwork for the laser-cut doors and windows for my model of the Church of the Transfiguration was done by my colleague Nigel Sprague and emailed to Chris Denning of CD 3D Model Making, who posted the resulting wonderful doors and windows to me, as well as fabulous laser-cut self-adhesive strips of HO scale wood shingles. After painting, I glazed the windows by painting micro-scale crystal clear on clear acetate and offering the clear acetate and crystal clear up to the inside of the window. Now I also use deluxe materials, glue and glaze. I tried to do only one wall at a time and stand the model on its slider end to let the crystal clear dry to form lens-like patterns in each pane. I find this slight distortion looks like old glass and gives a slightly obscured view of model interiors, which I like. And on the right here, there's a picture of me. I've also had myself scanned by the delightful Alan Butler of Model U, holding the original model of the church, so that I can be modeled standing on the steps to the porch, holding the model of the church on the model of the church. And here's the work in progress. I encourage anyone and everyone to get involved in the achievement program. I did, and I have the privilege of having earned my Master Builder Structures certificate now over 25 years ago. By taking part in the program, I was not competing with others. By taking part in the program, I was not competing with others, but raising my own awareness and standards of structure building techniques and enjoying extending my model building skills. I hope by sharing this with you that you'll want to try it too. Good luck and happy scratch building. And many thank yous to you all for your friendship, encouragement, and sharing know-how through the NMRA. And special thanks yous for encouraging my scratch building to Steve Park for encouraging me to take part in the achievement program, Chris Hopper for sharing his know-how, the idea of scale, color, and friendship, Peter Bowen for sharing his know-how, help, and enduring friendship. Michael Ingham for sharing his know-how, friendship, materials, and books. Brian Moore for sharing his know-how, enduring friendship, and enthusiasm. Gordy Robinson for creating and curating NRAx virtual model railroad conventions, and especially to my dear wife Kay Ross for marrying me and tolerating my enthusiasm for model railroading. And if you'd like to know more, then please email me. And there's my email address. So thank you all for listening. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, David. Great clinic. And like I said, I was on the edge of my seat all the way through that. And I've got a few questions over here from the Facebook chat. Andy says, I like David's good enough factor, rather sums up his modelling. So that was one of the early on comments. Dan also commented on, didn't think of building structures with a ridge below the sub roadbed. Good idea, and thanks. So it looks like a few of these guys over in the chat are definitely picking up some good ideas. And like I said, I was on the edge of my seat, and I've got a few questions for myself. And it sounds like you're from either the industry or something like that. I personally have never met you until tonight. And my first question is, do you find yourself overthinking your buildings? And my question is orientated based out of, I feel you're out of the construction industry at some point.
Yes, well, I'm now retired. I'm 72. I trained as an architect here in England. My late uncle, my English uncle, we visited England in 1962, and my late uncle took me on a tour of fabulous English cathedrals, Chichester Festival Theatre, and indeed, before 1962, our next door neighbor in Monterey Circle, most gracious lady, gave me a book on English architecture in 1961, which I've still got. I've always been interested in these old buildings and things. You know, I was last in New York in 1953. How about that? And I can remember my parents taking me to these glorious buildings, huge buildings, and I've always enjoyed looking at buildings. I joined my first preservation body, the old John Brown School historic building preservation something or other in 1962, age 14. You know, isn't it wonderful that we have these terms geek and anorak now? You know, I know what I've been all my life. And I just adore old buildings. So I got very, very involved when I came to England with something called the Victorian Society, campaigning for not simply to keep the buildings, but to give them a new use. So I became an architect and worked on the repair of old buildings. I worked as conservation architect in the World Heritage City of Bath for 3 decades and 5 months. Commissioned lots of different things, oversaw lots of different things, passionate about lime mortar and lime conservation techniques. So coming back to overthinking buildings, I mean, the real dilemma is, you know, here in England, there isn't that much space to do things. And I saw on Facebook recently, and perhaps this could be subject of another clinic, someone had retired and they moved from Nevada to West Virginia. And they said, did anyone have any plans of the Highfield train order office? And I thought, well, I have. So I put them on Facebook. And then I thought, well, actually, I've got the end elevations and the front elevation, but I didn't have the back elevation. So then I posted on Facebook the models of the buildings. And I shared this on Messenger with my dear friend, Brian Moore, who's, and you do look him up, Quisling. If you go on to YouTube and put in Quisling, Quisling, space, leave a space, CA for California, Quisling, California, and then scroll down and see his fabulous, fabulous modeling at Guadalupe. It is just fantastic. And it is really quite, and the colors are just superb. And his modeling is just superb. So he said, David, you've just got to do something. I have spent nearly 2 decades modeling Waynesboro. You saw those photographs of the Waynesboro thing with the majorettes of the West Junior High School, all lovingly painted. don't know. I'd have the hand skills. I couldn't keep still enough to do it nowadays. But all that's gone. The photographs of the memory. And in its place, everything that had been crowded in Waynesboro. And I was looking at it, I thought, no, that's the wrong relationship to building. So the Highfield building is in the process of taking its place. It's going to have 2 train order stands. It's the high point of this. And so I'm in the process of rejigging my modules to accommodate this. The other thing Brian said when he came to visit me, most generously, he looked at the modules that I took to Fremo gatherings. He said, David, I can see you damaged the corner of this. You're too old to be carrying this up and down the staircase. You can physically manage it, but you can't control it well enough. So I'm going to design you a new layout. So I had to share the Gibbons and Brothers. Actually, this could be making a good clinic. I had to schedule out everything I wanted to achieve in this modest way. And he has designed me the most fabulous new layout. My dear friend Peter Bowen, who lives not far from me, and can I put in a plug for our fabulous British Region magazine? It is fabulous. NMRA British Region magazine, Roundhouse. You can become a subscriber to Roundhouse. I'm not sure what the fee is, even if you don't live in the region. And then you can see it electronically on our website. And not only can you see the current copies on the website, you can see it all the way back, every copy to 1977 onwards. Huh. Peter has recently spent over 263 hours revamping the British Region's website, nmrabr.org. It is fantastic, absolutely fabulous. And I'm so thrilled that's happened. I completed my 2-year term as president last October, and what a note to go out on. It's just thrilling. So coming back to choosing buildings, I spent an agonizing amount of time thinking about this, and I've over the years collected a lot of information from all sorts of different sources, and so I've had a blast doing this presentation, and I've confessed about the 9-foot grid versus the 10-foot grid, Bless me, Reverend Father, for I have sinned. But
we've got a question over here from the YouTube chat from Jim, and he's asking, what is your favourite base structure material given your issues with warping?
Okay. Well, I started off using scribe timber. That was a nightmare. That was for the Highfield Trade Order office. Then I used cardboard for the freight shed. But my go-to material nowadays is styrene. Oh my goodness, sheet styrene. And the lovely Steve Park, I don't know who he knew or knows in Leeds, but he'd come to visit me. He said, oh, David, I brought you some supplies. And he'd bring me these really big sheets of 60 thou and 40 thou styrene sheet. And I've been enjoying looking. Oh, and by the way, thank you. I've just discovered that I can tune into YouTube on our widescreen television downstairs, and I went to the NMRAx stuff. Oh my God, my wife thought I'd never move again. I was transfixed. Of course, the one key program I love watching over here, which irritates absolutely the hell out of my wife. I don't watch it to irritate her, but I just adore it. It's American Pickers. Have you watched American Pickers?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you need a real shot of Americana and you haven't lived there for such a long time, it's a wonderful treat. Anyway, but watching the YouTube videos, I was very interested that the scratch builders over there were using these modeler's knives. The blades are so wide. I use surgeon scalpels. I use Swan Morton number 3 holder, which is very fine and thin. And I use 10A surgical blades. The number is 10A. So if, in those days when one went to train meets, I buy a box of 100 of these things. They're not the sterilized blades, but they're pretty sharp. But if you were to buy the sterilized blades, by golly, they'd be really, really sharp. So going back to the styrene, so you can use styrene sheet, okay, and oh, by the way, the other thing I noticed is that people were using their scale rules as a straight edge. Absolutely not. they're too thin, and you should use a much heavier steel edge. That's asking for trouble, and also damaging the scale. So I use a heavier steel rule. I mark it out with the tiny little pencil marks, and then holding the thing carefully, I score the styrene a couple of times, and you just put it in your hands and snap it. It's a clean cut. It's just fantastic. So if we just go back, here we go. So this is me and my wife going on holiday to our friends on the Isle of Man. So you can see there's a box there. So that's my toolbox, and then I've got another box with bits in it so that I can take. Sad, isn't it? While people are going for a walk along the beach, I'm cutting it. So here we go. Look at the right-hand image there. It's got A, B, C, D, E, and all those kind of things. So now we go to the center lower image. There's the drawing on the styrene sheet, and then to cut the windows out, I scored across and snapped it all in pieces, and then snapped all those other bits, and then glued them back together using plastic weld.
So, have you got any more in the chat there, Brad? Or
they're just having a general chat amongst themselves. I think we're pretty much done here, unless you've got a few questions over there. But
no, Graham put one in saying I'm building some buildings at the moment. It's more of a statement, but I reckon we could get David to go over into the YouTube chat, and then he could answer some of the questions there. What do you reckon, David?
Oh, that's fine.
So all it needs, I'll let Brad do the close off, and
yeah. Thanks again for the clinic, David. I'm sure Gordy will be in touch for another one in July.
And thank you both so much for hosting me and your patience with me, teaching me technology. It's been terrific. I've really, really enjoyed this. And and hello to my grandson in Birmingham, who I hope's been watching this too.
Well, we've got a little thing to do now called the Wheel of Chat, which we've been doing this evening. So the wheels come up on the screen now. So we're going to give it a big spin, and there should be a question come up for the people in the chat to answer while we set everything up then for Michael, who looks like he's ready to go there. So we'll hit the wheel, and it's spinning round. And what's our question going to be? And the question is, steam or diesel? So all of you people in the chat, what do you model, steam or diesel? What do you prefer, steam or diesel? We'll leave that chat go ahead in the background, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes with Michael, and we'll take it from there. So thank you very, very much, David, and we'll speak to you soon.
My pleasure and joy. Thank you all.